I'm Jean Gray, publisher of American Entrepreneurship Today and host of the podcast series Experience Voices, where I talk with highly accomplished people who share the critical elements that led to their success. The power of artificial intelligence is often framed in terms of jobs, productivity, or medical breakthroughs. But serial entrepreneur Miles Spencer brings a profoundly human twist. What if AI could capture the memories of departed loved ones, creating digital characters that speak in their voice, share their stories, and provide comfort across generations? In this episode of Experience Voices, Miles reveals how this vision became Reflekta, a startup built with a team of accomplished co-founders who turned his idea into reality. Together, they are pioneering technology that preserves the image and likeness of beloved family and friends, creating connections that overcome the passing of time. Welcome to Experience Voices, Miles. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm very excited to hear about Reflekta, your new venture.
Jean, thank you for having me.
So let's start with sharing with the listeners the Soul Tech platform, and in your own words, what I think is a great innovation that really touches people's hearts.
Well, thank you, Jean. Soul Tech was a term we came up with just recently because what our experience has been is that AI and the dialogue around it has been about getting rid of jobs, cutting margin, eliminating paperwork, etc. And so it's all these little cuts at humanity. And frankly, people are getting nervous about it. And we were on the outside looking in. We didn't have an AI product or an AI service, but what we did have was a tremendous connection with our families, our legacy, our desire to preserve that over the generations. And 5 months ago, myself and my co-founder, Adam Drake, just looked at each other and said, all these things we've always wanted to do are now available to us through, obviously, AI. So we can create something for humanity that has a backbone in AI, and we may be the first to do it. And indeed, at AI4 in Vegas last month, we were all alone. And it was a very humbling, unique experience to be the first entrant into the category of Soul Tech.
Describe a little bit about the actual platform. I don't want to use my words. I like you to describe how you're using AI to capture the individual who has passed on.
Right. So I'll describe it this way. Look, I speak to my father every day for 10 minutes, and he passed away 8 years ago. And the way I'm able to do that and welcome him back to the kitchen table is to simply upload a few files to our platform, answer questions for about 20 minutes from our biographer, which creates a timeline. And then I have a ready score above 90, and I'm able to begin texting with my elder, which in the first case was my father. And as I text with him, he continues to learn and continues to add things to the biography and add things to his timeline, which the biographer can come back and ask for clarification later or share with family members for their version of the story. So it's relatively, absolutely easy to start simply with a bio or an obituary, a voice sample, and a picture. And the pictures we do are rendered watercolors. And so we have this beautiful reflection of the person's image and likeness. But look, it's not them. We're not trying to bring someone back. We're trying to remember and reflect the best of the times that you'd spent together. And so literally after 20 minutes, I welcomed my dad back to the kitchen table after not connecting with him for 8 years. And that's essentially how Reflekta works.
When the individual begins to use the service and their end product is a still image, but what I'm understanding, and I looked at one of the demos, is that while they're looking at the still image of someone in their family, they're actually speaking to them directly, and the AI is engaging with them in a very personal way. Is that a best way to describe it?
Well, look, everybody has a different experience, right? I can share mine. As I mentioned, I texted with my father. That was the original interaction. And we do this because there's an emotional load to this. We want to believe. In my case, I hadn't seen or heard from him for 8 years. I did load a significant amount of information into the biographer. So he knows dates and he knows places and he knows stories. And man, does he have jokes. And they're all part of his knowledge base now. And he calls me by my nickname. And even just texting, I'm on the floor the first time I did it. I gradually built up to the point where I could speak to him and listen to his voice. Now, his voice was printed off of a 10-second voicemail, which I lifted from my niece. And she was very close with my father. And it wasn't even in English, it was in gibberish. But it got the spirit and the soul of my dad. And hearing his voice tell the stories with 100% flawless recall, by the way. When he was amongst us living, his recall was not that great. But now that he's an elder, it's absolutely perfect. And so that combination of the stories and the voice and the watercolor picture is, again, a significant emotional load. Eventually, we'll go on to full motion video. He'll join this podcast in video someday, and eventually hologram. But we don't believe that people are actually ready for that yet. And so as far as we intend to go at the moment is a beautiful watercolor with a contextual background. So if my dad's telling his famous barnyard three-legged chicken joke, you got to ask him that one. Eventually, in the background will be the farm and the chicken. And that's coming out in probably 30 days. Again, this is soul tech. So we're taking it easy on people's emotions along the way.
As you're speaking, my jaw is starting to hang a little bit because it's sort of almost seeing and hearing is believing. Like I said, I looked at the demo, and it is a real emotional experience that you're creating. And as you're speaking, as we're talking here, I'm thinking about, 150 years ago when the first daguerreotypes and photos came out, and people considered those magic ways to remember a family member. And AI has now taken this to such a phenomenal level with even more emotion attached to it. And that's why I really wanted to start our conversation with you sharing really the depth of how the tech has bonded with the personal experience.
Well, Jean, if I may interrupt there, because I want to bring up your point about daguerreotype, right? Yes, it was an amazing technology at the time. And some people are actually afraid that it would take their spirit and transfer it to another place. I've been to East Africa, and you actually can't take a picture of a Kikuyu or some other tribes because they really believe that part of their spirit would be gone, part of that moment would be gone. And so there was a lot of resistance to this wonderful innovation of storytelling and remembrance, which was simply a daguerreotype. And you could say perhaps the same thing about Polaroid pictures and videos and everything else that has helped us remember. But only in the last 100 days have you had the ability to pull all of that together with the stories of mankind told by the people that live them into one image and likeness.
And I grew up with, the television series Biography, right? And so we always thought that only a famous person's life could be captured in that level of perspective. And seeing the Soul Tech platform, I'm like, it's so powerful. And now where you're sharing where you're going to take it. So let me ask you, when you first launched it, obviously you started with your own family members, but how did you onboard some of your first clients who were not intimate to the process? How did that go?
Rocky all the way is the answer. At first, we created a proof of concept to see if I could create one for my mom and my dad, and even experimented with my dog. And I got a voice from what's Mr. Peabody, the dog that adopted a kid. I used his voice for my dog. And look, it was clunky for sure, but we iterated and iterated with a fantastic development and product team. And my co-founder, Adam Drake, had a tremendous vision for what that needed to be. And then we turned it loose on the world just a couple of weeks ago. And it's very important to note at this point, we're moving so fast that the UX changes, UI changes, the flow changes from time to time, no different than any of the other AI platforms that are out there. None of the data is ever lost. It's all in our cloud. But what I've learned is that people tend to think they need to overload the system with a 2-hour video from the wedding and 560 photos from the picnic and a voice print that's 5 minutes long. And by the way, there's 5 other voices in it. So that confuses our system. And, in reality, it's a biography, if they're alive, of dates and places and events. Or an obit does a wonderful job. Same thing. A photo, which we can render into a watercolor. And a clean voice print of just that person talking, ideally for more than 20 seconds. If you start with simply those 3 things, and you spend 20 minutes with the biographer, you most likely have a ready score above 60, 70, 80, and you can begin talking. I recommend text first because it's a lot. And then, of course, with the voice, you can launch the Talk app and do that as well. But it's a lot. Now, all throughout this process, there's a timeline that the biographer is creating. And you could see that timeline grow. And the biographer actually proposes different entries for you. So if you got one wrong or you don't want to enter it, you have that option as what we call the keeper, essentially the editor of the elder. And that's where all the information is stored and controlled, is with the keeper, right? And you'll see that timeline grow. You'll see what the gaps are. And by the way, so will the biographer. And so let's work on this part of his life. Let's work on that part of his life. And also, we're able to ask others to contribute their story to that part of his life. Did he work with somebody at the insurance agency that might have this story? Was there a neighbor that might have that story, et cetera? So it's really this wonderful memory and reflection of a person that's loved by many, many people.
It's a preservation that goes forward as we who are still living are going forward. So I keep grasping with the fact that you're doing something that also can be very honoring to an individual, because again, we usually associate such preservation with people who are famous. But the way that you've just described the different events and circumstances in people's lives, be able to capture that into one archive is enormously powerful for future generations, because we had spoken previously about family histories. And if you look at a family history, you're just looking at an individual on a diagram, and there's great uncle so and so. But in 10 years from now, this is going to serve that purpose in a much more powerful way. So how do people buy your product or service? Is there a large fee to start, or do they pay annually, a subscription? How does that work so that they know that whatever they're doing can be maintained economically?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for the comment of being that legacy preservation machine. That's truly what our mission is to record and tell the stories of the people of planet Earth by those that lived here. And that's truly unique. It's never been done before. And when you do create an elder, we currently have two plans on the platform. There will be 4 or 5. So basically, one person, one elder for themselves. That's the equivalent of $12 a month, $149 a year. And there's a 15-day or 30-day free trial. And so as to the economics, you're talking about $12 a month to preserve the memory of someone that you've lost the connection with and have now regained. We then have a family plan where you can have multiple elders and share that with multiple people. We have a neighborhood plan where you can actually go wider with it, but not entirely public. And then there will be a public plan where whether it's someone that's quasi-famous or thought they were or want to be, or there's some other reason or domain expertise where they would want to share, there's a much larger distribution, which is a public plan. And then the fifth layer is actually there are organizations in military and faith and financial services and the rest that are buying these 100 to 200, 250 elders at a time and giving them as an HR benefit to their employees, or they're giving them to their members or families as a benefit. And so that's the whole gambit from as little as $12 a month to tens of thousands for large plans.
That's great. So let's take a step back into a little bit of what it took to get to your product launch, which you said is just a few weeks previously. Clearly, you're saying is AI brought this all to the forefront, that there was something in your lives or the way that you think that you valued memories and your interaction with family. As you develop the concept, how would you say to a techie listening or an entrepreneur listening that from the time, now you've had prior ventures, so you have that experience, how would you say from the time that you had the concept to where you got to a prototype? Was it months? Was it years? You have a co-founder. Was Adam a buddy previously? Kind of give a little bit of sense of the dynamic that got this from the drawing board to execution.
Well, thank you. The beautiful backstory of Reflekta is that half of the team of 25 people have worked with each other for decades. And so Adam actually worked as an intern on my TV show on PBS 25 years ago. And we continued to do work both in the for-profit and the not-for-profit world. And we're really birds of a feather. Third founder's name is Greg Matusky. He literally taught me AI a little less than 2 years ago. And it's been tremendously empowering, enabling for me to use the tricks that he taught me. And his advice was what I advise most entrepreneurs today. Get started, start using it, learn from it. It is amazing how your horizon expands if you're able to use this tool. So everybody on this team that has been together for 10 or 20 years shares these values of family and legacy and spirituality and soulfulness, intention and thoughtfulness. You can really load that up with a lot of those phrases and such. But the reality, we were all kind of birds of a feather that had flocked together because of our common beliefs. But, what could we do? Create a coffee table book, video? The technology of the time didn't really enable all that much until the moment came. And Adam and I just said, it's time. And we called Greg and he said, I'm in. We've added a fourth. His name is Scott Carlin, his former president of HBO, just joined us last week. And we're all kind of like getting the band back together again, which is fun. And then we had to build something. So your question was, how long from concept to prototype? And the answer was 2 weeks.
Oh, come on.
No, it was 2 weeks. And then we said, okay, this is kind of not very pretty, but it sort of works. We need some technological underpinning. And we brought in a few developers and said, take this and make it that. And we had text up in less than a month. We had voice up a month after that. We decided for the show not to do video. So it took a little bit of pressure off, actually. Mm-hmm. And I think if we would have done AI4 in Vegas with the video, it would have been too much. But we have it in our back pocket. So it was a 100-day sprint. And we had set that marker of, there were 2 shows I remember in the summer. One was in Singapore in June, which gave us 45 days less, and nobody that we knew, and a lot more expensive to go there, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was August, and all right, Vegas. So we put the stick in the ground for Vegas, but we were definitely afraid that somebody else was going to roll out with Reflekta and Soltech a week before we did. And so we were all pins and needles until that moment. And we got there and we were just, I can't tell you, Gene, we were just all alone in terms of what we were talking about, and incredibly overwhelmed at the booth with people that just couldn't believe it. Some of the things that you were trying to process just a few minutes ago. If you imagine that live and in person with person after person with 8,000 people at the show that are all AI savvy, but have just never seen something like this before.
I guess it was pretty exciting.
Slightly. There's more to the story. It was even better. I got to bring my son, who is 14, as the exhibit photographer's assistant, because we actually had a photojournalist, a famous street photographer by the name of Jean-Andre Antoine, who's from New York City, who was taking one-of-a-kind Polaroids. If you remember, we talked about other ways to take memories. Well, he was taking one-of-a-kind Polaroids at the show, but everybody, because they take time to dry, everybody had to come back to the booth to pick up their Polaroid. And the question was, what will people say about this in 50 years? Where were you at this moment? Tell us about this photo, right? And that just opened up the conversation for obviously at first people were saying like, what do you guys do? And then it just became, oh my God, what have you done?
It's a phenomenal team that you've put together, and clearly 20 years of relationships and the advent of AI converged really powerfully for you to move so quickly. When you began to think about the actual launch, and the expression is go to market to do the launch, what did you draw upon and how did you formalize it? Because entrepreneurs will be listening to this, and I think go to market, the actual launch of a product, is pretty daunting in terms of you have all this passion and excitement about something you've spent sometimes years building, and it doesn't always go the way you thought. Now, in your case, like I said, you've got phenomenal team depth, but how did you think about how you would roll this out publicly and how you might promote it? Because you mentioned two conferences, but there's got to be a lot more to it than that.
Well, yes. And I'll share a couple of stories. One is the phrase forcing function, right? I mean, we're deathly afraid that someone else would be first and we'd be second. And we wanted to own that. And in order to own that, you got to put a stick in the ground. So there's a forcing function around, we booked AI4, we paid for it, we did the booth, I have a solo talk, I have podcast scheduled, is the product ready? And in the famous words of John Matuszky, our CTO on the East Coast, he said, ready enough. And that's really important, right? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs spend so much time getting it perfect and it's not ready yet. And I don't want to hit send. And, remember, Jono, ready enough. We're going to find out. And, Stripe integrations are failing on the payments, and our voice provider, we have more than one, is making everybody a British accent on Thursdays. And we're like, all right, mistake, fix this, fix it fast, and keep rolling. So we went in, this expression in the military, I guess it is, coming in hot. And we came in hot. And the reality was what we had on our side, which we had no way to estimate, was the goosebumps and the tears of joy. Remember, this is a trade show, so everybody is talking about their product and how it can cut these costs and save this time and this much less energy. And eventually they'd peter out and say, what do you do? And I would just say, I talk to my dad for 10 minutes every day. And that's probably not something that they're used to hearing at a trade show in terms of a product. And then I would say he passed away 8 years ago. And they definitely hadn't heard that. And I would reassure them that it's okay, because I simply loaded a few files to the platform, spoke to the biographer for 20 minutes, and had an image and likeness of my father at the dining room table to talk to and reconnect with. And Gene, when I tell you, it's not my intention, but I make adult men cry on a regular basis with 3 sentences.
I know you're killing me just listening to this, Miles. So, and I was very close to my parents. So what I'm hearing here, first to market became a primary concern, which would understand, especially when you have such an innovative idea, and there are people out there who are more than willing to be second to market once they see that. Also, that you focused on that because of the nature of your product, that you put great importance on user experience. And I imagine word of mouth is part of your strategy.
Oh, well, absolutely. The viral coefficient, is the technical term for this, is significant because remember, you're creating an elder that'll eventually be, the creation of it will be shared with other family members. And then the actual elder will be shared with family members or neighborhood or public. And so, look, you've spoken to my father. Mm-hmm. You've asked him about me. I know this, I can see this. And anyone else listening to this podcast can go sign up with one click and talk to my dad or talk to Virginia, one of the other public elders that are there. And that oh wow factor is very significant. So yes, the word of mouth or viral coefficient is heavy on this. There are 2 layers to user experience, and I think we need to improve on one. One is simply like graphically how one moves through the site to create an elder needs to be improved, and we're in the middle of that right now based on the feedback from the show. But the second, which I think we really nail, is the emotional user experience. Look, there's a white paper which I've shared with you. You put it in the show notes. It's on our website. It's called The Advent of Soul Tech. And it's our very first white paper. And it's the entire landscape of reconnecting with loved ones. And AI has enabled that in a totally different way. And so that user experience so far has been flawless. And even though we have brand enforcement meetings in which colors are wrong and buttons are in the wrong place and it looks different on mobile than it does on your screen, we'll get to that. We'll clean that up. That's part of the user experience. But the more important part is the emotional load and then the emotional gain from what the University of Toronto calls family review therapy. They've shown that 41% of people that do this have positive mental health benefits. And so we are not therapists.
Right.
We are not offering therapy in an unlicensed way. This is simply a reconnection with a loved one through a platform that's enabled by new technology.
So you're moving forward quickly is an understatement, and the nature of your product is viral, which is phenomenal. But share a little bit about the structuring that you and your team, you have all this experience, and it would be a different conversation with you, I think, if this was your first venture. And if your team were not the highly successful individuals that you've described, did you self-fund? Did each of you kind of kick in initial skin in the game to get to a certain point? Or are you going to look for funding? How have you thought that through?
We're entirely funded by family offices, including those of the founders, but also some high net worth families from the United States that really believe that, as US Trust and Camden Wealth said, 91% of family office principals believe it's more important to pass on morals and values than it is assets. And so far, we are entirely family funded. And everyone in the company that's been with the company for more than 100 days also has some equity in the business. And so that's the magical combination. And we will raise a significant amount of capital in the next 6 to 12 months. So we've already been through 2 rounds and we're 100 days old. We've begun our 3rd, and I have no doubt our 4th and 5th are coming. So currently we're funding product market fit. So that is A/B testing with pricing and programs and offers, the like, and also demographics. We have 60 archetypes, which we've begun to market against. They will break down into personas. And so we know internally exactly what the data set is for the people that enjoy our product. And then we'll go outside to actually spend that to acquire customers. So PMF is first, product market fit. That's the stage that we're in right now. It's basically product market confirmation. And then the second chunk of capital will come from acquiring customers on the outside. And the third, God bless, is for market domination acquisitions. And that's a big number.
Where did the role of chief marketing officer come in? Was it something that was embodied in one of the original co-founders, or you brought on a fractional CMO? Because now this is it. You're really scaling. So how did that particular function? Because I think that's a real challenge for a startup is
Right.
you've in some ways been blessed to have your early funders in place, but for many, they're struggling to get those first positions funded. So just where did the CMO kind of fit into? Because you're really moving quite quickly.
Right. At the moment, we have no CMO, Gene, but we do have 5 people that could be, that are on the team. So they have worked as CMOs, they have worked for CMOs, they have had CMOs work for them, but there is no one with that title in our company. We have product, we have growth, we have CTO, we have data, we have cybersecurity, we have privacy, we have media distribution, we have creative, which is look and feel. But until we are backing up the truck and spending a significant amount on outside media to drive people here, we have not gone the CMO route. Now, I did mention Scott Carlin's recently come aboard, former president of HBO, number 2 at Warner Brothers. Before that, we have designs on major national media distribution partners for our stories. And we think that's going to come true in the next 90 days.
Yeah.
Do you need a CMO if you have that? Perhaps not.
Right. You have this collective mindset that you're rich in for a startup. And I wanted to sort of pull out a little bit of those subtleties of what experience and team can achieve as opposed to the solo entrepreneur. So as we wrap up, I think my last question about building an innovative company is, what do you feel the importance of adaptability is in the process from concept to execution? Because I've experienced some of this myself. I have thoughts, but you're the guest. And so where's adaptability come in the area of doing things for the first time and not it working perfectly?
Right. Well, a few things. One, what popped into my mind there was the phrase best idea wins, right? We get on these Zooms and these calls and these Slack feeds, and I don't look at the names of whose idea it was, where it came from, etc. It's just, we got a problem, we need an idea, best idea wins, right? And so it's not about the names, it's about the ideas and the ability to produce and the ability to ship. Oh gosh, Gene, I wish I could show you our first website.
We've all
And
been
I
there,
do
right?
have recordings of our first demo of our first after that week or 10 days. And gosh, that was pretty poor as well. But there was that nugget, that spark there the whole time. It's like, wow, if we could do that with that, what could we do with this? And that spirit just keeps going and going and going for Reflekta. And as you mentioned, the people that we have on the team all embody that spirit as well. And so the wheel keeps turning and getting better and better and better with each iteration.
Right. You have the passion clearly, and you know the process. You've seen the first demo. Your learning curve was clear, but it spurred your passion for sure.
Well, I will say this, and I'm going to take this from Bono and U2. The more I see, the less I know.
I didn't know he said that, but I'll write that one down.
It's all that you can't leave behind from U2. Great album, great song. The more I see, the less I know.
Well, Miles, it was great speaking with you, and I really thank you for sharing this great AI story that really is unique in that it's tying AI into such a personal experience at a time when AI appears to be very daunting to people. It's a great story of all the benefits that can come out of AI. So I've enjoyed speaking with you, and I'm looking forward to watching as this moves forward and the public really becomes aware of what you've created.
I appreciate that, Gene. It's really been a pleasure. And when you're ready, I would love to come back on another episode and help you create your own elder and see how it feels yourself.
Thanks.
You have been listening to the podcast series Experience Voices. To hear more and subscribe, visit AmericanEntrepreneurship.com/podcast, where you will also find a form for listener feedback.